All right, these tweets are actually monitoring tweets. It's true. Reports the IRS wasn't just targeting conservatives and their taxes, but conservatives and their Twitter accounts and their Facebook accounts and their email accounts. Anything to find something on them. Forget about crossing the line. Did the most feared government body on the planet just wipe out that line to Ron Meyer and Steve Laser and Mercedes Schlapp? Mercedes, wow. One word, wow. What do you make of this?
Wow. Well, you know, and also, Neil, they're also checking what books you're reading as well. So what's next? Like the photo of the children that you have to give to them? I mean, seriously, this is the worst kind of political corruption. And what we can agree is that we have seen both sides of Congress actually coming together and saying, this is beyond mismanagement. You know, the president needs to take swift action. People have got to be fired. People have got to go to jail. I mean, this is a serious scandal that I think is just haunting the president. And what's so unnerving is that when you have the president saying that he learned this on a news report, I mean, I've worked at the White House, and I've got to tell you, his advisors aren't serving him right if he just found out through listening, you know, to the news or watching television.
Ron, where do you think this is all going?
Well, I think it's incredibly sad. I think it's going to a point of where, you know, who actually gave these orders to only go after conservative groups? It had to have come from somewhere. I doubt it was a few rogue agents. I think it's a really uncredible story that the White House is putting out. And really, the funny thing is I've actually been on the receiving end of this. I actually worked for one of these 501c4s and a 501c3. I had to watch my own Facebook and Twitter because our lawyers had told them that the IRS had said that, hey, you better watch not just your company accounts, but your employees' accounts. So I couldn't even go out and say I liked one presidential candidate over the other because I had to be afraid the IRS would audit my company.
Steve, here's what concerns me about this, that I actually think it's not a surprise. If you're going to investigate people, you go to these sites. I mean, that's fair game. That's open. It's out there. It rattles me a little bit, but I could see why. But they did appear to go to exhaustive efforts to, if not target these individuals, slow down the process such that they would quit the application process. And we talked to many on Fox News who did just that. And that was the desired intent. Is that a criminal intent?
I don't know if it's criminal, and I'm waiting to see the full Inspector General report from the Treasury. Some of it started to come out, and I'll talk about that in a second. But one of the things that really infuriates me about this whole thing is we had liberal groups targeted in 2004. That's come out now, right? The NAACP was targeted. Greenpeace was targeted. Several black churches that criticized the president, President Bush at that time, were targeted. We didn't hear anything from the Republicans. Republicans are the folks that don't like the IRS. You would have thought they'd be the first people to complain if the IRS was engaging in any sorts of malfeasance.
Justifying one for the other, right?
I'm not justifying. You know what? I think there's something screwed up with the IRS, and I think that's something that we should investigate.
So maybe that's one thing both sides now are mutually agreeing. It's an abusive agency.
I do, but I think we should wait. I think the information coming from the IG is very interesting. That's
all right. Well, we do know this much. There are scores of these conservative groups that were targeted, and I think, to Steve's point, we have seen the IRS used as a political tool going back to what Franklin Roosevelt and John Kennedy and Richard Nixon, and I mean, so it's been a bipartisan, sneaky attack. But I guess what I'm curious about, Mercedes, is whether we want that entity having a greater role, let's say, in things like healthcare. We've hired 16,000 IRS agents to administer 49 different financial provisions within healthcare. Whether this makes us go slow on this entity altogether.
Right, and I mean, the IRS will be enforcing the tax regulations for Obamacare. So I think that giving them that oversight makes it more vulnerable to having these sort of political problems that we're seeing already. So again, especially when we're seeing that, you know, from the top down, from the commissioner down, I mean, these were problems that were happening, you know, 1 or 2 years ago. And the fact that they didn't even address it or bring it up to the Congress, I think, is an incredibly big issue. So giving them more power, expanding their role is incredibly worrisome, especially when it comes down to Obamacare.
You know, Ron, the one thing I worry about in a crisis like this, normally you try to get ahead of it when something more is coming out. Hence the apology last week from the IRS. By the way, I don't know about you, but I don't think the apology thing has ever worked with me in the IRS. Oh, I'm sorry, I did the Steve Martin line. I forgot to pay my taxes. They never countenance that, but be that as it may, that they were ahead of something here, and that the acting IRS commissioner might have been aware of something more going on here, and that this was bigger. And I've talked to many individuals who said, you know, found it odd that I was audited. I found it odd that my company was audited, that this might go way beyond what we thought. And that's what's at stake right now. This is a far bigger crisis than it's been made out to be.
Well, I think that it's always great when we see self-disclosure, but the problem is, why hadn't we found out before, and why is it happening now? Why was the self-disclosure now? I think there's a lot of questions that certainly need to be answered, and that's why there needs to be an investigation. I think the problem is when you see the IRS constantly picking winners and losers, whether it's political winners and losers, like we're seeing with this, or corporate winners and losers. I think we really have to get some more transparency in the IRS, and this is a huge problem with the IRS existence in the first place. And really, when we look at what they're doing and what they're doing to our entire system, I think it's one of these things where I think we should have greater scrutiny on what they're doing, whether it's on the corporate side or the political side. And this is a great example why, because people have their own motivations of doing things, especially political motivations in government. And that could be greed, it could be for politics, and we need to have greater transparency and greater insight into why these types of things happen.
Well, I do know this, Steve, to your point, which I think is a good one, that this has happened before, that there were laws after Watergate that would prevent this sort of thing from happening again. And whether it's rogue agents just doing what they thought the boss would like them to do, even though the boss might have never said them to do this, it's happened again. So how could we be so sure that it's safe giving the IRS even more power when this is distinctly possible, despite all the laws on the books outlawing this?
Well, I spent some time thinking about this actually last night because I am sick
Me too.
of,
I mean, minutes ahead of the show, I was studying like crazy.
I saw that. I'm sick of this happening to both parties, and I think everybody is. And I think one of the things that should happen is the folks in charge of the IRS should come up with a plan on who they intend to audit, how they intend to go about it, and they should report to the ranking members of both the committees in the House and in the Senate on how they do that. So there's complete transparency, like Ron said. There's got to be transparency. They shouldn't be making up rules willy-nilly on the fly like this.
All right, but if the IRS does come after any of you again, you just say, "Oh, I'm sorry."
We'll just give them your information, Neil.
See how that goes.
We'll just friend you on Facebook and give them your information.
Yeah, that would be nice.